Good morning, everybody. Welcome back. It's Sunday. Um, I'm Eli, and this is Elfbait. If this is your first time here. Today is just going to be kind of a general chat day. I had put out on the Discord a request for some topics to talk about, and I really couldn't decide on any one that I wanted to do as sort of uh, the only topic for a show. So I figured what I would do is kind of cherry pick some of the topics there and see what I have to say about them. Um, it's been kind of an interesting last few weeks. Um, had a lot of missed games on my front. Uh, we had the normal 2E game that I play with Cody. That's had kind of been bounced by various things going on in people's lives. It's not dead; it's still alive. It's just um, something we had to do. I mean, you have to make allowances for real life. In that regard, also, I haven't been able to run my 5e game. Just a matter of combination of attendances and my general not feeling great. I will not run a game if I'm not feeling up for it because I feel like I have to be close. I have to be at least like 75% to be able to run a game. Otherwise, I am causing problems for my players and myself. Uh, just a moment here. So yeah, so those games haven't happened. By the Sword did happen, even though we did have to do a delay on that one as well. The players there have made it into the interior of the island. They made it to the caves at the base of the volcano that's there at the volcanic mountain that's at the center of the island. They witnessed this sleeping Cyclops, and they spent a good amount of time engaged in general tabletop RPG dungeon party paranoia, investigating a chamber that included what they are figuring, rightfully so, is the Eye of Kemet, a great magic pearl of some renown, and they are reasonably and suitably concerned about their safety. Good morning to those folks who've chimed in. Kerlik, Grumpy Old Slan, Saxius, welcome all. And that is a cool picture. I wish I had a higher resolution version of it. But this is what you get when you pull images off the internet. So that has been the RPGs that have been happening. I do miniature stuff too, and I've slowly but surely been tinkering away, painting some stuff, gearing up for another terrain building bash. This is not stuff I'm probably going to put on the channel because I don't have a setup where I can really adequately film the process of putting terrain together. Not to mention, I really don't have a process. It's very much an artist's angle towards building terrain where I know what I want to build and I have the stuff and I just start throwing it together and it generally comes out looking like what it's supposed to look like. Morning, Society of Role-Playing Gamers, excuse me. So, what am I talking about today? Again, just talking about things in general, gaming in general. I might cherry pick from these answers I got on the Discord. But also, I mean, you can throw things out in the comments if you'd like to hear me talk about things. Going through kind of a weird spot in my gaming. And this is not a gripe or a call for help or anything like that. It's just very much feeling the pressure of a gamer who is wanting to push out into other games and do other things, but is finding that a combination of time and opportunities is keeping him from being able to do so. I try to maintain a pretty decent balance between life and gaming. I do spend a lot of time thinking and talking about gaming, and I could very well schedule more games in my life. But at this time, I feel like I'm kind of maxed out on game time slots without actually cutting too deeply into the rest of my life. Do have a wife, do have a life, um, and those things are important as well. Morning, dirty history and hobbies. So, and my throat is also trying to kill me today. So, lovely. But yeah, so I'm kind of feeling that pressure as well. It's like I want to play other games. There are lots of games that I own that I would love to dive into. It's just a matter of opportunity. My 5e game is reaching sort of a natural conclusion, and assuming we can get the sessions in to actually reach that conclusion. And I feel like once we hit that point, it might be time to look at running other games for that slot. But that carries baggage in and of itself, because there are certain players in my group that won't play certain games. There's one player in my group who doesn't want to play anything other than 5e. It's the game he knows, and he's not really interested in learning other games, and I respect that. Gaming is a hobby; it's for fun. We should do it to the extent that we want to and that we are comfortable doing. Should never feel pressure to conform to other people's desires or wishes of, to play the games that they necessarily want to play. That's not an invitation to be a jerk when you join a table. If you come up to a table and they're not playing the game that you want to play, well, then kindly leave. Be respectful to them, just like we would expect that they would be respectful to you. But that said, I have a player who will bow out if I run another game, and he'll come back. He said, I'll bow out, and then when you guys play 5e again, I'll be back. So, I mean, he's not like it's not like an ultimatum. It's just not what he's interested in. Let's see. This is this is YouTube in a nutshell. I was looking over my videos this morning just as I was kind of gearing up for this, and I noticed that my Keep on the Borderlands article rebuttal video I did, not a stream, but just a straight video, has had more views at almost 1,000 than nearly every other video on this channel combined. I mean, that may be a bit of hyperbole, but it's a huge gap comparatively. I mean, I think the next most viewed video on my channel is like 280 some odd views, proving that controversy sells. So, not the same thing, dirty history and hobbies, but again, there are certain things that fuel viewership. D&D is the hotness, so if you try to do anything other than D&D, YouTube will kind of bury the lead. The only thing you can really do to counter that is to come up with clickbaity titles like "Why this game might be better than D&D," or "Here's a game you might enjoy more than D&D," or "How does this game compare to D&D?" These kind of things that you have to lead with. We've seen this in the miniatures community, where primarily Warhammer-based channels, if they ever want to talk about anything, have to do a comparison to Warhammer. And channels that are not Warhammer-based simply just, they don't do the numbers that Warhammer does. And it's unfortunate because, if I can get on a soapbox here for a moment, the only reason Games Workshop gets away with the things that it does, pricing, churn, predatory marketing practices, FOMO and all of that, poor quality, just absolute near disdain for their community, is because as far as the miniatures community at large, and by miniatures community at large, I mean the more casual and probably, let's say, mainstream off-the-shelf gamers, Warhammer persists in that space because it gets an unfair advantage through promotions, through the very present, very real um, viral campaigns that social media provides it. And YouTube is social media. Um, so other games have a hard time gaining traction because they just don't get the pushes that Warhammer and Games Workshop do. Um, it's so, and also, I mean, honestly, Games Workshop, the way it functions, there are a whole bunch of other reasons, but as far as the YouTube corner of it, that really helps keep Games Workshop up there and Warhammer up there. Let's see. Well, that's cool. That is really neat. I'm at a space locally where I'm at where I've found some local gamers, but they're playing at times that I'm just not available. I have a work schedule that keeps me unaligned with most people's schedules. I live in the Midwest, but I work on a West Coast schedule. So by the time I'm off work on a 10-hour day, it's already 7:30 at night local time. So it's really hard on a weekday to do anything. A lot of people can go play games after work. I really can't do that unless I can find somebody who's willing to play till like midnight. And then also if I want to try to get my 52-year-old ass to play a game until midnight. I think videos that provide gamers with systems, like demonstrable systems, do well. It's something they can get into. It's something that you're providing them an actual functioning tool that they can use, and so I think those are always a good one. Interesting. Well, I mean, I would say there, and hey there, hi there, ho there, bear. That your audience is not really, I think, a D&D audience. And so I think that you probably have a demographic around your channel that is much more open to other voices in the games. But yeah, it's um, once you've got yourself branded as a D&D channel, what are you going to do? Hey, Cody. Um, and let's see. So yeah, I mean that is indeed kind of the nature of the beast when it comes to having an established channel and just being functioning in the environment that is. Um, yeah, I mean this is a good thing if you can demonstrate those tools in a way that people can follow along and can make them available to people. I think it's gonna have them coming back for that. Eventually, you can shift your flow to be becoming that channel. You know, I know, for example, within the D&D sphere, some channels are better known as channels for reviewing, whereas some channels are known for kind of tricks and things that you can use for improving your game. I gave up trying to understand YouTube a long time ago because I'm not in it to actually build a channel. I'm not, I don't have any delusions about this becoming my day job or even a side hustle or anything like that. I don't really worry too much about it. It was just interesting to see what that was the video that's done so well on my channel. Um, I honestly struggle with topics to to cover on my channel, and it's a combination of a few things. Like, first of all, I'm not overly opinionated about a lot of things, so I don't really feel like I can speak to any particular point by myself and make it interesting for a long period of time. But also, I I tend to get things said and done out of the way, and then what am I going to do for the rest of the hour and 45 minutes? Let's see. Yeah, I mean, Slan, you're building a channel. And by building a channel, I mean your channel is new. I don't know how actively you're working to build a channel in the conventional sense. And so you're at that point where you can kind of play around and see what sticks. And you will either find a niche or you'll perpetually do whatever you love and you'll have fun with it and it'll just exist at the state that it's going to exist. Um, I, when it comes to doing streams, very much, I think I'm better on a stream with other people. I mean, I got into streaming as a guest on other streams. And then I was encouraged to start my channel back up, and I did. But I feel like, streaming as a single talking head, if you're not an opinionated bastard, is kind of an uphill battle. I'm I'm not that guy. Let me see here. I'm going to go see what kind of answers we had. So Saxius, of course, provides a very succinct and bullet pointed set of questions and or possible topics. I think elements that work well for mysteries and investigation and how to keep suspense. I think that's a good point. Good one to talk about. Honestly, I feel to do it right, you have to be willing to take your time. You have to be patient. Your best investigation and mystery is going to be when the players never quite feel at any given time along the process that they have the whole picture. You want to trickle out clues and information in a way that is telling enough to keep them going and looking for more, but never enough to keep them satisfied with the information they have until well and enough into the investigation where naturally they just come to a conclusion, and it's impossible for there to be any other possibility. I think you really want to pace the revelation of things, unless of course your mystery of, well, I guess in a way, I mean, you can do this in a couple of ways, because if you have a mystery that's made up of several chunks that build up to a greater mystery, you can have those smaller mysteries be revealed a little quicker because each of them is itself just a step along the way to a larger mystery. I think some of the big campaigns for Call of Cthulhu are probably a good example of that, where you have lots and lots of adventures scenarios that go on during the campaign, and each of those is probably resolved a little quicker than a single standalone campaign style adventure would be. By campaign style, I mean like not a one shot, not a Call of Cthulhu scenario written as a one shot where it's brutal, it's nasty, it's going to be in your face and slapping the players all the time. There are those scenarios, and then there are scenarios that are designed for a little bit longer play, and also designed to be fit into an ongoing campaign. And then you have those scenarios that are part of a specific large boxed campaign. So there's a three layers of that. I feel like you can have quick reveals of information and keep the mystery a little snappier if you're doing it in a one shot, or if you're doing it in those sub adventures, sub scenarios that are part of a larger cohesive campaign. That middle ground of the designed to be played in a campaign but not for a specific campaign, those kind of longer format scenarios, those are where you can kind of bleed out the mystery a little longer, because you're going to be playing those over a number of sessions, and really as many sessions as you want, because it's in an ongoing campaign. There's no rush to get it done at a table, at a con or something, or at a, in the one shot slot, and there's no hurry to get it done, so you can move on to the next step in that big major campaign. Let's see. No, don't make them work to find clues. I'm not saying don't make it easy. I'm not saying make it easy. I'm saying don't make them work to find clues. So mystery games only work and are only fun if your players are getting clues. If they're not getting clues, then you are defeating the primary reason for playing those sorts of games. It would be like running a D&D campaign, a traditional D&D campaign, and intentionally pushing combats to a peripheral, pushing the monster fights to the periphery of the game. Yes, you can do it, but you're kind of at that point doing away with one of the core tenets of the game. I mean, the game is built around that. Yes, you can have non-combat D&D and it have to be satisfying, but I don't think there's anything worth. Yes, your players should work for clues, but they should, but only in as much a way as it's organic to the story, and not in any overly complicated, intentional way. Um, in fact, there's a lot to be said for if players take reasonable actions in a game that would lead them to a clue, they should just get the clue. There shouldn't be tests. There shouldn't be, um, you know, you shouldn't hide things behind, ability checks, things like that. Yes. So, for example, sample scenario: you're in an apartment. If the players say, "I'm going to go ahead and do a detailed search of the apartment," um, then you could you can as a keeper, as a GM, just reasonably make an assumption of what they would find. If there is something particularly hidden in the room, secret compartment, loose floorboard, whatever, you could have them make a perception check or a search check or whatever the game system is that you're using. However, if the player specifically states, "I'm going to stomp around the floor and look for loose boards," and there's a loose board in the room where there's stuff hidden under it, just give it to them. "I'm going to go ahead and mess around with the books on the bookcase to see if any of them trigger a hidden passage." I would give them a chance of. I would just give that to them. It is reasonable to assume that they're going to do that task until they find it. The exception being is if there's ever actually like a time crunch, like if they're in a hurry, there's a pack of ghouls coming up from the basement, or coming up from a well in the basement, and they're stuck in the basement. They can't find any way out, and they're searching for a secret door. And then you start rolling because there's something at stake. That's not necessarily a clue, but the same thing applies. Um, you know, so first of all, this is a very setting specific question. If you're in the 20s, you're not going to know. I mean, other than if the blood's a different color, you're not going to know. We don't have the science in the 20s to determine whose blood, what kind of blood. I mean, this could lead into other clues. And so we find blood on the floor. Later on, searching the grounds of the mansion, we find a bloody slipper, and that slipper belongs to Lady Everland. Okay, cool. Now we know that Lady Everland was injured, or at least engaged in some blood, but we don't know at this point what that means. Maybe Lady Everland's bloody slipper out in the grounds, is there because she murdered somebody in a brutal way, or and fled in across the grounds for the manor house. And then that leads to that leads to your next clue. Of course, you're going to be okay. So now we have a bloody slipper. And the players started to deliberate. Nobody's seen Lady Everlyn, so is Lady Everlyn the victim, or is she the perpetrator? Well, if she's the perpetrator, well, who's the victim? Because all we did was find blood, and then later on, maybe they either find a body, or they find and that body is either Lady Everlyn or it's the butler, who happened to actually come across her in the study while she had let her illusion of being human slip, and he saw that she was a serpent person, and then she killed him and swallowed his body as serpent people are wont to do, and then who knows? But I mean, obviously she didn't swallow him if they found the body, but who knows? Maybe she killed him. She left the body there, and she just fled. She didn't have time to swallow him because it takes time. Because it's a ritual to be able to eat them to take on their visage. But no, I think that's a really good question, Sacchus, as far as how to meet out clues. And I think the thing is that clues should be done in a meaningful way, and I think they should be done in an intentional way. I would always avoid implanted red herrings, like specifically putting red herrings into the game. Your players are going to create enough of those of their own. And we all know that players are going to derail the game, and not in a bad way. Just matter of factly, they're going to derail the game, whether or not you put misleads in there. If you put misleads in there, you're just adding to that and increasing the chance of your campaign just getting bogged down in some weird tangent. I don't know. I'd be curious what you mean by too many clues. There's a good mystery building theory, which is the 3 clue rule. Basically, every important piece of information should have 3 clues that lead to it. That's a good one to work with, honestly. Those clues can sometimes be the same, clue for multiple parts of the investigation. But having multiple clues that lead to conclusions or to other clues is not a bad thing. All it does is increase the chance. I mean, I guess again, are you using those clues in a meaningful and intentional way, or are you just spamming out clues? And I mean, if it's muddling up information, the player's trying to figure out the information, then maybe it is not intentional and informative in the way that you're putting them out there. But you can refine that. Honestly, I feel like have 3 set clues in mind for your 3 set clues in mind for any particular conclusion in the story. Your players will always come up with other things to ask for, and then you can add to it based on the clues that you have. For example, if you have a matchbook, a footprint, and a handkerchief that all lead to an NPC's presence at a particular location. And then the players go and say, well, I'm going to check the entry logs for that place. And you decide, then at that point, you can also decide to give them that because, you can make a decision. Was this NPC mindful enough to not sign in when they were trying to be there clandestinely? Or were they there, not thinking that it was going to be an issue? A lot of people who are up to things don't think that the things that they're doing are going to lead to them being caught. And that's why people get caught, because nobody is really as smart as they think they are when it comes to avoiding, capture and detection. Alternately, maybe the person didn't sign into the book. Maybe they signed in under a false name, or they managed to fake signing in, and the desk clerk, was just on autopilot, and so they faked signing in, handed the book over, and the desk clerk, didn't pay attention. But the desk clerk might have you know, noticed something visually, and so when your players ask, well, you know, maybe they don't have the matchbook and the footprint and the handkerchief there yet. Maybe all they have is the matchbook that points them to that place, and so they're there with a very loose thread because all the matchbook means is that somebody was there, and so if they have an assumption, they can start asking questions. You can fill it in from there. Um, yeah, this is the thing. I feel like it's a weird, delicate balance between making them easy to find, um, and then um, too hard to find. If you make it too easy for players to find, then they're not going to feel challenged. Um, but that also depends on your group and the type of game you're trying to play. And just like there are mystery novels that are more or less complex and deep. Some of them are just very transparent mysteries, but you're along for the ride, and the experience is the important thing. And some of them are really keep you guessing as you're reading them, or watching them. In case if you're a visual media person like myself, watching them. And so those are both okay. If your Call of Cthulhu mysteries don't need to be deep, and it's more about the experience of writing Mr. Toad's Wild Ride until you run into Sthagwa himself, the greatest Mr. Toad, then you you're still having fun. I think that's a good point about Call of Cthulhu. I think a lot of people think that Call of Cthulhu can't be an action game unless you're like, well, that's Pulp Cthulhu. No, I don't think so. I think you can still have action playing regular Cthulhu because, it just depends on how you want to play it. Not everything has to be a plotting mystery that just slow creates. I mean, some would say that's part and parcel with the genre, but if you read any of the works that the mythos as a whole are written around, and I'm not just talking about Lovecraft, because Call of Cthulhu is not based just on Lovecraft, and that's an assumption a lot of people make, which is absolutely incorrect. Call of Cthulhu is based on the Cthulhu mythos, which is authored by many people, and all of them had different styles, and so you are fair game to run your games in whatever style you want. I mean, this is a way you can run it. It's a complicated way to run it because I think there's a problem um, in tabletop games where there is a perception a lot of times that anything an NPC says is somehow more accurate or true than it should be, and you can see this in play. How many times in D&D have you ever had the players run into an NPC who talks about, oh yes, those mountains where all that steam and smoke comes from, that's where the dragon lives. You go up there and he'll fry you. And really, it's just a geothermically active spot. But the players immediately believe there's a dragon there and never go. Because somebody said that. So I think with the Rashomon thing, where it's a matter of everybody has their own perspective on what really happened, you have to be careful with that because your players may very well take everybody at their word or more at their word than they would in a real situation. Let's see. Oh yeah, trust me. I struggle with this a lot myself. It's a combination of having lots of ideas and also being very ADHD. So when I'm running games, I often think of, oh, this would be cool too, or this would be a fun dramatic beat, and I think my players may not, because often they don't know what's going on. But a lot of times I feel like I've thrown something out there and ended up really throwing a monkey wrench into the game or derailing my original thoughts because something seemed like it would be cool. The rule of cool is a double-edged sword. Let's see. Yeah, Cthulhu Invictus definitely can run as a sword and sorcery type thing. Um, I like Cthulhu Dark Ages. I think the only problem with the Dark Ages rules is it's still written in 6th edition. I hope they do a 7th edition version of it. I don't know if we ever will because I think it leans heavily on the BRP um, engine, which is firmly ensconced in 6th edition. And for some reason, I have a feeling will never or can never be pulled into 7th edition Call of Cthulhu. I don't know why that is necessarily, but fortunately, 7th edition Call of Cthulhu is really easily backwards compatible with anything 6th edition Call of Cthulhu. But I know that BRP, being a fantasy engine, does tend to ramp a few things up in terms of combat for hand to hand. But that's you kind of need that if you're running a more sword and sorcery or fantasy RPG type of setting. And Cthulhu Dark Ages, I think, leans into that because, well, armor and sword swinginess is much more important to the context of that kind of genre as opposed to 1920s or modern Call of Cthulhu, where it's less likely that you're going to be running around wearing plate mail and swinging a sword. And armor in Call of Cthulhu is pretty impressive, especially when you get into modern armor. When I ran my one shot, I gave the sheriff access to police body armor. Police body armor in Call of Cthulhu made him near monster proof as long as the monster hit his torso. Because it soaks a lot of damage. Yeah, I mean, you could do that. But what I'm saying is that players don't. There's a lot of things players can do, but players don't always do those things. And you have to be cautious of that. And it was specifically speaking to the Rashomon thing, because in the Rashomon type of setting, you were having a whole bunch of different NPCs all presenting the same situation from their point of view. So it's a very focused set of opinions towards one thing. The passing remark about the mountain and the dragon, it's not like it may not be the whole village that talks about that. Although, those rumors do persist. So if one guy in the village is saying that there's a dragon that lives up there, probably the whole village believes there's a dragon up there. It could just be 100 years old superstition to explain away the mist and the fog and stuff. Could be that there's a completely different monster up there. Could be that there's a portal to the elemental plane of air. You don't know. Yeah, this is a good point. If that is what he believes, you're not going to detect an untruth. And this is the other thing, to remember when you're going back to Sachs's original question, which has seemed to have informed this entire stream, but that's okay. Is that people's perception is what forms their truth. So if he honestly believes there's a dragon there, and he has no reason to doubt that there's a dragon there, because this is what it's always been. This is what's always been believed. There's stories going back 10 generations about the dragon in the mountains. You're never going to detect a lie. Now, if he is lying, and he's the reason there's so much smoke and steam up there is that is covering his secret gold mining operation. Well, then you might, but that's a completely different story. an intelligence check is not going to reveal that, because I mean, you don't have enough. You wouldn't have enough information to make an informed uh, deduction, which is what the intelligence is going to tell you. Yeah. Yeah, it's, you are never going to, I mean, to further answer this, um, yeah, I mean, if you had enough information to be able to tell the villager he was wrong, you wouldn't be asking him in the first place, or you wouldn't be trying to roll. At that point, you would be telling him, "No, I know there's not a dragon up there, and I've read in a book, or I've been up there, or whatever." Uh, Buy-in is always important. One of the reasons that Call of Cthulhu works for mysteries is because it's intrinsic to the game. It is part of the core conceit of the game is that there's going to be a mystery. So if you're doing it in another campaign, you have to either have advanced knowledge that your players are into mysteries. In other words, you have cultivated or curated your players to where they're okay for mysteries, or you explicitly ask, "Hey, I would like to run a mystery in this campaign in the future. Are we good with that?" And I mean, sometimes you can say up front, "This is a mystery adventure. This is a mystery scenario. So please put on your Sherlock Holmes hat." You're not doing your adventure any disservice. I feel it's important for players to know they're in a mystery when they're playing a mystery, um, because otherwise they're not going to conduct themselves as if they were in a mystery. So there's nothing wrong with going, "Hey guys, this is a mystery adventure. So please, get out your magnifying glass, put on your Sherlock Holmes hat, or your Poirot mustache, whichever is your preference, and let's get some adventuring going on." Uh, I have not, but I know that's directed at Dirty History and Hobbies. I know that the movie for the Name of the Rose um, is one of those ones that's on my list of um, mood visual settings for my D&D campaigns. Um, the visual stylings of movies like Hawk the Slayer, um, Dragon Slayer, uh, those type of kind of muddy, dark, gritty are right in there, along with Name of the Rose, the Brother Cadfael mysteries. I really like those, and I like their kind of early medieval kind of setup. That's where my brain always goes when I'm running D&D. Um, yeah. Looking over a few things here. Sorry, guys. Need to give my throat a rest. Yeah, deerstalker hats. I always forget the type of hat that he wears. Deerstalker hat. That's one of those hat types that I would like to own. I own a couple of hats. I have a pith helmet, not the military style, but more the explorer style because I like the pulp stuff. And back when I was playing Germans in Flames of War, a buddy of mine picked me up a World War II style German helmet. It's actually a leftover, or actually a modern reproduction made on original machining from Spain that was sent to the Spanish during the Revolution over there, the Spanish Civil War. Um, so it's kind of accurate, But yeah, so those are the two helmets I do have, two hats I do have. I would like to get the Deerstalker hat. I feel like I need one with as much as I like pulp stuff. I think a fedora would also be good. Um, but yeah, hats. I wouldn't mind having hats. I want to get a hat tree that I can put them on, just to kind of stick in the corner of my game room. Let's see. I did not know this, that there's a TV show of the Name of the Rose. What? Slan, please post what network that was on, or if it may. I wonder if it ever made it outside of Canada. Uh, Um, let's see. I think the basic rules for mysteries apply regardless of where you're running them. I've run mysteries in D&D, and they're all the same. The major differences come down to how clues can be investigated. Um, I've run modern Call of Cthulhu, and of course, investigation there now includes Google searches and hacking and uh, submitting to websites for files and stuff like that, doing image searches, checking out video surveillance, things like that. Um, it's the same stuff. You just kind of reframe it. This is a truth about long form programming in general. As long as they use the time wisely, I feel like Dune um, really does. I think Dune would really come into its own if there was a large budget, long format production of Dune. Everybody who's done movies, no matter how well they've done, like the new versions of the movies are great. I think they're really well done. But for the sake of fitting ideas and the story into the context of a movie, you have to make concessions. Um, you know, there's that 4 hour cut of the '84 Lynch movie that still doesn't cover everything, but so I mean, and in two movies at like 3 hours each, the new one still doesn't get everything. So I mean, I think a long format stuff tends to do it right as long as the people are invested in it and don't turn it into shit. Let's see. Yeah, I mean, and then of course, if you're doing it as a feature film, you're engaging in a different type of storytelling than you would be if you're doing long format television. Your projected audience is going to be different. There's a lot of considerations when you're doing, depending on the format you're doing. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and look at some other topics that were brought up here. We've got about an hour left. Let's see. What else do we get? What we got? Let's see. A couple of these are a little long, like different kinds of magic systems. I feel like that's pretty in depth. Um, I guess we can kind of dovetail off of something I just said. Deciding on this is from Caroline. Deciding on the feel / atmosphere of your campaign and how to embrace that through storytelling and game mechanics. I think that when it comes to feel and atmosphere, that is tricky at the table because you, as the GM, have something in mind, and you can communicate that to your players, but every player interprets that differently. I'm going to go on a bit of a soapboxy tangent here. This is why I think that some of the arguments that are made for are made against the most basic of safety tools. And I know safety tools is a big, for a lot of people. I'm just talking about the basic stuff. Content warning. So content in games is often hand waved through this idea that, oh, I'm running a horror game, you should expect horrific things. So, and I'm using this to demonstrate why atmosphere and feel are tricky. So, the problem is that if you say this is a horror game, you should expect horror. Everybody has their own idea of what horror is because horror itself is not a well-defined genre. It's not a well-defined construct. We have silly horror like Jason and Friday the 13th. We have Friday the 13th. We have Halloween, slasher movie horror, and then we have horrific horror, Human Centipede, Hostel, things like that. And so, if you assume that horror covers all of that just by saying horror, you are bound to fail in that. You cannot assume that another person coming to your table is going to get everything out of a simple descriptor like that. So, how does that relate to atmosphere and and feel for your game? The When you set up your atmosphere and you put it out there in the first place, you have to make sure that your players understand this, but you also have to accept that there's going to be a little bit of. You have to accept that your players are going to interpret your information in an imperfect way and be okay with that. You can use gameplay and description to course correct. But I think you have to do that with an even hand. There's a lot of GMs who would be like, well, if they're just going to fuck around in my game, I'm just going to punish them. Well, so you're a dick. Because if the player is legitimately fucking around just to be an ass, then yeah, you shouldn't punish them in game because all you're then doing is sending a message to the rest of the players that you have a vengeful streak. You should literally have a talk with that person outside of game and address it person to person as an adult. Being punitive in game is stupid, in my opinion. It wrecks games and it sends out bad messages. At the same time, if somebody is misstepping in your genre, your setting, your atmosphere, you can do things in world to remind them of the setting that is kind of more diegetic to the game, as opposed to just yelling at them across the table. I'm obviously not advocating for yelling at across the table, but you could easily remind them, for example, like, I don't know, if it's in a dark, fantastic setting where there are monsters out at night and the player decides that he's going to go casually just stroll down to the pub at night. I mean, you could have them get attacked. You could also, for the first few times, warn them and remind them of the setting by saying, as you walk down the street, you realize that, the street is empty. Nobody's here. And then you can point out to them that all the shutters are closed and locked tightly. And that, you can remind them how every window is draped with a bead curtain because, the evil spirits that are out there have to stop and count every bead before they can enter a portal. You could have something flitter or fly across the moon at night and remind them that they are in a dark and spooky setting. if you're, just as an example, without having to sit there and say, well, you decided to walk out into the town in the middle of the night and go to the pub, and so a giant vampire beast swoops down from the sky, grabs you, and carries you away to the haunted castle. Your character's dead. You can do that. Another way to do it is to make sure that you send plenty of messages up front. As you're wandering through the forest, you find the body, the charred remains of a body, tied to a stake. And then the party's like, oh, that's, they burn people at the stake here because, going with the dark fantasy analogy. You could then also, if they decide to investigate it, you could talk to them about how the teeth don't look right, or the skull shape is strange. It's elongated, and the leg bones are bent the wrong way. You can throw out hints. You could have roadside shrines in places. You can build that atmosphere. And of course, I'm using dark fantasy as an example because it's a favorite of mine. But if you're doing cyberpunk, just hammer out the ever-present nature of media. Have flash advertising transmitted to the players every time they go out, and talk about the billboards that are everywhere and how any vehicle that has flat space has an advertisement on it. Have people, private citizens, walking around with like merch advertisements scrolling across the back of their jackets, just to really hammer out, if that's a thing in your setting, to hammer out that commercialism. If you're playing a science fiction game where the heavy-handed empire du jour, whatever setting you're in, is a thing, make sure you remind them there are checkpoints and there are audio loops. Remember, citizen, blah blah blah, da 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 da. Have patrol vehicles, have them see innocent people getting harassed by authority figures as they walk through the street. If it's a setting where aliens are particularly put upon, have some poor alien, hot dog vendor having his stall, overturned by, jackbooted stormtroopers just because, he's got blue skin. And, it's, you can sell your setting through your description, but you have to reach that balance of inserting it where you can, to where it doesn't become a gratuitous info dump or lore dump. Let's see. I'm gonna go back to some of the comments here. Yeah, these are. Sci-fi and horror lend well together because sci-fi, I feel like sci-fi, horror, and anything blend well. So sci-fi is a genre, yes, but it also can function as a setting. So, for example, Alien and Aliens both use science fiction more as a setting than for their horror or their action, as opposed to the genre being the central genre of their the features. So I think you have to decide which is your genre and which is your setting, because for example, Star Wars, I would say, is a fantasy genre set in a sci-fi setting. And people are like, oh, it's not science fiction at all. The setting, the trappings are science fiction. It's a science fiction setting. But it is a fantastic story. So it's sci fantasy. Let's see. Well, and right here's the problem. So if I just say horror, this is a horror game. You should know what you're getting into. And I'm thinking something like The Meatball Machine or Hostel or anything like that. You know, that's a problem. I also feel like content warnings while I believe in them, I also don't believe that they need to be ultra specific, and I don't think we need to uh, cater too much to people. We just need to give fair warning. You know, um, if you have, the example of phobias comes up a lot too when it comes to horror gaming. Um, and like, so most of these problems also come up when you're playing with strangers, so convention games or casual games, pickup games. If you're playing with people you know well, regular group of people that you know what to avoid. Like if you have people in your play group who have very specific and real world trauma, I would hope to God, lowercase, you know, figurative figure, um, that you don't run that in your games. I feel like if you had somebody who's phobic of something, um, then you would try to avoid that in your games, or at least run it in ways that are not as triggering. And yeah, I know that triggering is like a hot word and it's been overused to the point where it doesn't mean anything anymore, but it's a real thing. And you have to remember phobias are not rational. Phobias are things that people don't have control over. So if you have an arachnophobe in your game, people have different responses. So I would hope that, if you have an arachnophobe in your game and you know them, you know what sets them off. Simple descriptions of spiders may not do it. Showing them a picture of a spider on your screen when you're playing on Roll20 might be an issue. Um, at the same time, maybe you just avoid spiders. Sub in something else. Spider can be replaced. Anything a spider can do, some other monster can do, and not be a spider. Because a lot of times, the phobia is specifically limited to the thing itself. You could have a creepy crawly humanoid that creates webs and cocoons people up, and they'd be fine with it because it's not a spider. Anyways, um, uh, yes, it can be fun to run horror games for strangers, but at the same time, if you are running a horror game for strangers and you don't give a fair, you don't put up any attempt to be fair warning, and you're doing it just to be a jerk, um, gotcha is overrated in games. If you're running a game just to get a rise out of people and get a gotcha, it's bullshit. I mean, it's the same thing as like running D&D games where you absolutely just pull the rug out from under players just to go, ha, I got you. You know, there's no way you would have ever seen that trap the room or whatever, blah blah blah. Um, it's it's just for the sake. Honestly, it's it's one of those things that really gets me. It's just GMs who set out specifically to try and get people. Um, I also think that it's kind of I'm not I'm one who doesn't really see the merit in trying to scare players, um, as opposed to scare their characters. I want my players to be in control and having fun at the table, and I want their characters to be scared. Um, I mean, good, genuine concern for their characters' well-being is fine. I think you're putting in an extra amount of work that's unnecessary and generally has very little payoff if you're legitimately trying to frighten or scare your players. Um, you also really run the risk of going too far. That's where you really run the risk of actually dredging up traumas and triggering people and stuff, you know, and I don't think it's worth it. Um, yeah, I mean, this is it. I want players to be scared for their character. I don't want players to be scared. Just like I want, if a player is going to play an evil character, I want his character to be evil. I don't want the player to be evil. It's pretend, it's make believe. I don't think I expect any of my players to enjoy the wholesale murder of entire species of creatures, but their character might, and that's fine. I don't think it's a reflection on them as a player. I think at the same time, when you need to be careful. There's no there's no merit to trying to truly scare your player beyond, and this is the caveat, what you are looking for at best is a ghost story around the campfire level of scared. That's, I think, the farthest you really want to go. Anything more is too much. Anything more than that, you're really just you're pushing into the realm of negative psychodrama, and power play, and not in the gamey sense, like in the real world. You know, I got you kind of a way, and that starts to venture into the bad territory of tabletop games. It's in the same realm as overlord DMs who actually think that they're the shit because they have people dance puppet. Look at my players. I'm so much the shit. That's right there with the adversarial GM, the creepy GM. Let's see. Let's see. Yeah, I would still. I mean, dirty histories and hobbies. I mean, players may ask for a lot of things, but at a certain point, I have to ask myself, do I want to go there, and what is up? Like, why are they asking this? And if they're because what does this say about the player themselves? I would see that kind of as a warning, unless I knew these people really well. I would see that as a warning as to what kind of a player am I inviting to my table. I would put this in the same realm as the player who's like, yeah, I want to have a lot of romance in the game, and I want to have a lot of, you know, or I want to really get into my murderer character. I mean, I would wonder about that. I mean, now I wasn't there and I don't know how the conversation went. And you can only fit so much into a comment, so there's that caveat. Again, if you're playing with people cool. If you're playing with a stranger, I would worry. Yeah, this is the thing you want. Yeah, again, I think it's okay to have your players worried in the fun way. Again, we're looking for campfire ghost stories scared. You know, Goosebumps book level scared. Although some of those things were outright freaky, creepy. Um, and not like actually terrified. You don't want to squeak your players out. You don't want to like I mean, there and even that's a line. There are times where you're just like, it's okay to leave your players going, "Damn, that was harsh," and you don't want people to actually like, "I need a break. I need to go. I need to leave the table. That was just too much." There's a line. Um, you know, I know. For example, when I have had, um, and to be honest, uh, lots of factors play into that. I'm not going to dive into them all. I mean, you have to understand the people that you're playing with, and that different demographics have different places they're coming from. You know, women players, male players, people of color, people of particular backgrounds. You're going to have to, not that you can be accountable for all of that, but just be aware that something that's not a problem for you may not be a problem for you because you've come from you have existed in a space where that has not been an issue. Um, An example of this, not related directly to gaming, but from my real life. One of my best friends growing up was a very cool black dude who I grew up with. Didn't really think of him that way, and as a child in the '80s, was completely unaware of some of the stuff he went through. It wasn't until I grew up and became much more adult, much more mature, and aware of the world in general that I realized that some of the things that he had said when we were growing up that we just kind of poo-pooed and hand waved um, were very real issues for him. And they were issues that I would never understand as a kid. First of all, I was stupid as a kid, like most kids are. Second of all, you know, I came from a position in life where, as bad as I might have had it, I never had it as bad as he did for a number of reasons. Um, and I'm not going to get into specifics. I'm going to keep it general. But I think that it's important when you're bringing people to your table for the sake of the fun. You're not hurting anything to do a little, to just have a little empathy. Um, and I know we've gone far from the original question about atmosphere and feel, but I feel like it leans into that atmosphere and feel. If you're trying to push atmosphere and feel too far, you can go too far. Whether it's for the things that we've slipped into here or for the more practical gaming things of lore dumps, info dumps, too much description, you know, GM soapboxes where you're just up there monologuing, you know, NPCs having conversations between one another for the sake of exposition of the world. You know, yeah, you definitely want to be careful of when you're setting up setting. So, anyways, all right. Let's see. Hey, Daniel. It's interesting you mentioned this because there's some interesting house ruling in Call of Cthulhu. There's some fun ones that I think Seth Skorkowski mentioned this either on his podcast with John Hook or on his channel. When, for example, they're running like persuasion or intimidation checks because Call of Cthulhu also has an attractiveness stat, um, and also has a build stat. Um, they tend to factor those into those checks because a dude with like a really big size doing an intimidation check is going to have a boost as opposed to a small guy. Like and so an attractive person on social roles might is likely going to do better just because of how the human brain is wired. So you can have some fun with that in depending on your rule set. Um, let's see. Yeah, again, the biggest caveat to all of this is just know your players. If your players are gross out horror fans and they are every bit as creepy and edgy as you, then cool, go for it. If that's the type of people you have around you and you can all handle it maturely and nobody's actually out there keeping bodies in their freezer, then cool, go for it. Have fun with it. At the same time, if one person in your game is not cool with it and you decide to shift into that territory, I think you're the one who's being the jerk, not you specifically, but you figuratively. Um, Now, if everybody's coming together for a specific game and you lay it out front that, hey, this is the type of game I'm doing. Like if you're doing a horror game, like, and I guess horror is one of the big ones where it plays out. But I think you could call this another thing. It's like if you're going to do a fantasy adventure game, let's put horror aside. If I'm recruiting players for a fantasy adventure game, and I tell everybody this is going to be a gritty, you know, high fantasy setting. And I have a player. I'm going to flip this around too because I know people are like 5e players. This is where the problem is. No, like let's say I'm going to say this is This is a high fantasy, high adventure game, and you come to the table and you're like really irritated because it's not as gritty and down to earth as you wanted. Well, then bow out. If this is just a pickup game or a one shot or something, don't play that game. But I think it's up to the GM there to specify up front what kind of fantasy. Just like horror goes, saying this is a fantasy game means a shit ton of a different thing to different people. Some people might think, oh, this is a Conan game, sword and sorcery. That's fantasy. Some people might think this is Game of Thrones. Some people might think this is Tolkien. Some people might think, oh, this is like really just like off the wall traditional D&D fantasy, which is D&D's been around long enough where it is its own style of fantasy. Now, I think we now have had D&D around long enough to where there are fantasy novels written with a style of fantasy world that it's informed heavily by Dungeons and Dragons and video games. So, I mean, we often hear about the 5e players that come to gritty tables and they just, they're not happy because they can't be a superhero. It goes the other way around. If you just don't play in games that you're not going to have fun in. But that also comes down to the GM. Make sure you're honest about what kind of game you're running. If you throw out generalities and then your players don't fit into that setting and feel, going back to the topic there, it's kind of your fault if you weren't specific. If you say cyberpunk and then you don't qualify it with anything more, don't be mad when somebody comes in thinking Bubblegum Crisis and somebody else comes in thinking Neuromancer, and then some other guy who thinks he's doing Snow Crash. It's you have that other guy who's like, we're doing Max Headroom. It's if you don't specify, if you don't qualify your genre statement, then it's on you. Oh, I mean, Record of Lodoss Wars is a good one. That's one of the OG D&D inspired ones. Well, full conversion Borgs have been in the works for a good long time. So I don't think that's a problem, especially if you're talking about Cyberpunk the RPG, because full conversion Borgs go all the way back to Cyberpunk 2020, and were even possible technically in 2013, the box set, because they had linear frames and body plating and stuff like that, so you could kind of finagle that. But yes, I get your point. Full conversion Borgs that look like normal people are a thing. They're a staple. They go. I mean, technically, the Terminator is a full convert. The Terminator could be that if you really want to, or RoboCop kind of points to that as well. Not that RoboCop was, but extrapolating on the technology. Yeah, well, and I feel like psychological horror, the slow creep horror, the eldritch horror, the unspeakable, unknowable is one of the reasons that Call of Cthulhu, I think, does really well for itself is because it tends to stay to this. I mean, there are some adventures that have much more of a squick factor, and I know John from Yo Geek, one of his favorites is I think Forget Me Not is the one he really likes. That is kind of gross out, but I feel like I like the psychological horror. I also tend to like when I run Call of Cthulhu. I love having some ambiguity in there. I think I mentioned in a few streams back there was one scenario I ran where the players were out. They basically end up on this island with a lighthouse, where there is a crazy scientist who is engaged in some pseudo-scientific work that threatens to bring Yog-Sothoth to the world. And in the context of that, the players ran into the resurrected but not quite right daughter of the professor's housekeeper, who she loved and still treated like her daughter, even though she wasn't physically her daughter anymore. She was a Yog-Sothian monster now. And they solved that mystery. They figured out what was going on. They destroyed the doctor's machine before he could he could call Yog-Sothoth to the world. But at the end of the scenario, they could see the daughter standing on the shore of the island. You know, her mother was dead, the doctor was dead, but this basically child monster was left behind. I think it's you know, you can have some psychological and some emotional stuff going on in your games and still have it be creepy and linger with the players. You know, one of my scenarios, they found out that there was some sort of giant maw at the bottom of San Francisco Bay that was opening up to an eldritch dimension, and you know, that was initially revealed through some hastily snapped photos through the portal of an experimental bathysphere that was being tested out in the bay. And so, yeah, it's like, you know, one picture might have like teeth, and another picture had part of an eye, and then one picture seemed to be a weird landscape that they didn't recognize because one of the shots managed to actually be able to take a picture of what was on the other side of the portal. Yeah. So, hey, nerds, nerd. Let's see. Let's see. Going over some other things. Talking about Baudelaire. Well, I mean, hopefully your players aren't the ones unleashing things on the world, but you know, that can happen. Let's see. I have about 20 minutes left to see if I can grab another topic. Subgenres, that's a little too long of a topic to get into. Class and skill-based systems and genres, what they might be suited for. That's hard to say. I guess in short, I can give you my opinion on it. And so again, the question was class, or the topic was class and skill-based systems and genres, each, and what genres they might each be suited to. I think science fiction games are probably better off with classless skill-based systems. To me, the nature of science fiction is better when it focuses less on specific classes and more on what people can do and kind of a free form ability of people to do things. It's not to say it doesn't work, but I think it works better with skill based classless systems. Fantasy. I feel this is going to be an introduction. So I don't think fantasy necessarily needs classes to work well. I just feel that class-based fantasy feeds into the genre. Characters in fantasy settings tend to be archetypical, and so having those archetypes tends to help. Yeah, nerds, same thing. You know, like, that said, I mean, I do enjoy a fantasy setting where magic is a skill, for example, that anybody can get a hold of. It's just that magic users are more specialized in it. And what's funny is that 5e allows this, but people poo-poo it because you can have things like magic adept and stuff like that as a feat in D&D in 5e. And so that allows you to have say, that character who perhaps dabbles in magic or picks up a little magic on the fly, but it's never going to be as good as a magic user. Um, so yeah, I think that class-based systems, while they're not necessary to having a good fantasy game, they certainly do help. Um, so character categories, in a way, I think I know what you're talking about. Character categories are sort of the bastard child of classless and classed systems. They still limit you in most cases, um, and they don't limit you in a way that's narrative. Well, that's that. Let me back up. They often don't limit you in ways that are narrative. Uh, for example, skill-based systems may often limit your character based on the path of the skills you take, especially like career-based games. Traveler is a good example of that, where you select different career paths, and those give you different skill options at different levels. Um, so there is all sorts of shades of gray, and yeah. Um, a good example of a skill-based system that uses character categories that kind of bugs me is Cyberpunk. I do like that Cyberpunk Red seems to have addressed this, where you can learn the special abilities of the other categories, class, whatever you want to call them. But it always seemed dumb that like net running was like a character class skill. Like net running is a feat. It's something you would learn, I assume. Corporate authority was something that was a skill that only corporates could have, but it's really just a matter of putting in time with the company, right? Um, so I know, so I'm pretty sure Cyberpunk Red addressed this, and I know that back in Cyberpunk 2020, there were at least house rules for it that we had come up with, and I think they may have even been published elsewhere. The ability for characters to start with these abilities and then eventually be able to spend a large chunk of money, experience money, meta currency, to learn those other abilities works. Because another example would be, it sometimes gets really muddy when you have that stuff going on. For example, what if I have a solo? I make a character who's a solo to start with, but later on through the course of the campaign, he becomes a police officer. Do I not get the police officer's special ability now? You know, it's you know, it's weird. I think if you're going to have a system that has categories and gives like abilities by a category, those abilities should be framed as a talent in that environment, or something that is not tangible as a learned skill. So, for example, a net runner. If I was to write a net runner, for example, I think I would avoid making net running the skill, making the ability to do net running a skill, and come up with some sort of like net awareness or virtual aficionado or skill or something. I don't know what I would title it, but you know what I mean. Some sort of talent or ability that shows that they are familiar with, that they are comfortable, they have experience and exposure to the virtual environment that gives them advantages over somebody who just has the skill. Especially in a setting like Cyberpunk, where it is implied that the net running that they do in Cyberpunk and Matrix running and Shadowrun and almost every other Cyberpunk game is just the way that people do computing. It's more of a skill. Things like corporate authority or police authority, those are things that would be earned over time. I think those could actually be done as a talent, because a brand new cop on the beat is only going to have a certain level of authority, which is based on strictly his badge, as opposed to a cop that's been on the beat a lot longer, who has established a reputation, and all of that. So, um, on the other hand, though, just put a reputation system in your game, and you can sidestep most of that. Let's see. You know, I've played I've played only the original Shadowrun, and I've played Cyberpunk well into the 2020 days. Um, was never a fan of Shadowrun, but not because of the system, which is what most people dislike it. I don't like mixing Cyberpunk with fantasy. I would prefer just straight Cyberpunk. Cyberpunk 2020 though, I prefer it to Cyberpunk Red. I feel I've had this conversation with Karolik, I believe. Um, Everything that makes Cyberpunk Red better than 2020, you can lift out of Red and put it into 2020 and just make 2020 better. But 2020 has everything you're ever going to need, and 2020 is the wonderful bit about Cyberpunk the RPG is it is not written to be any specific movie or IP. It is probably the most open and generic, but still flavorful Cyberpunk RPG I've picked up. It doesn't lean too heavily into one aspect of itself or another. Like I have a couple other ones and I pick them up and like clearly there's a gimmick in this one. Oh, this one is Cyberpunk, but it's all about overlaying um, onto remotely operated bodies. And so, Cyberpunk just, it's one of those older style games that doesn't set out to be anything specific and allows you to make it what you want, kind of like D&D was. D&D was the fantasy RPG, and you just made it what you wanted it to be. You made your own campaign. It gave you all the tools you need to run it however you wanted. I would still go to Cyberpunk 2020, and the nice thing is all the original books are still available as print on demand and for relatively inexpensive prices. So, uh, let's see. There's enough people who've talked to me about wanting to play Cyberpunk. I should just run a Cyberpunk game. I have a city of my own that I made up. Back in the day, I was a big fan of Appleseed, and so I created this sort of parallel city to Night City in Cyberpunk. In the Cyberpunk 2020 world, Night City is a manufactured city that was built um, just from the ground up. It didn't occur organically like most cities do. It was built. And so I created another one that was out in the middle of the ocean on its own little island. We originally called it Pacifica, and that was before Pacifica existed in Cyberpunk, and now Pacifica exists in Cyberpunk. So I don't know if I just erase Cyberpunk's Pacifica and replace it with my Pacifica, because the Cyberpunk Pacifica is just a city a city on the mainland. But no, so yeah, I mean, yeah, as many people as I know who Night City was not, as far as I understand, built by corporations. I think it was built by. I'm rusty here. I haven't spent a long time, but first of all, I think it's named after the guy who built it. Something blah 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 Knight, and I think it was built as sort of an. It's one of those, like, think of it as one of those very typical um, dystopian future things. We wanted to build an idea, we failed, and I think that's what Night City was. We tried to build a new type of city, a city in its own right, built from the ground up, not organically, and so therefore not suffering from all the foibles of the other cities like LA and everything that already existed in California, because Night City's in California. And then, but yeah, it's been a while. I Yeah, I'm not so sure about the jumping back and forth in time. Um, the There's a couple of ways that I've been wanting to run a Cyberpunk game. I wanted to run Cyberpunk in um, a post Earth environment, not interstellar, but kind of a little bit more along the lines of take Cyberpunk and sort of blend it with the Expanse, because the building blocks are already there in Cyberpunk as it is. They have a pretty well established orbital society in Cyberpunk, enough to where there are at least a couple of generations of orbitals, uh, people who've grown up and been born in orbit, and they have Moon and Mars colonies at the last part of it. Like the Mars colony is super small, but I think a Cyberpunk where we have established colonies throughout the solar system, it would be a cool way to play it. It gives you just more real estate to play with. Another way to play Cyberpunk um, would be to tack Blue Planet onto Cyberpunk. If you're not familiar with Blue Planet, it's an RPG in which Earth has settled exactly one planet. And that's because we just happened to end up with a wormhole to this planet in our backyard. And so we went through this wormhole, and there was this other world there called Poseidon. It's a water world. We started to expand out. It's kind of a cool background. So we go there. We set up an initial, like not a colony, but like a settlement. Um, and then everything goes to shit on Earth, and so all the support for that colony, that settlement on Poseidon, just dries up overnight because no nation has the resources to send them help, and everybody's struggling, and the Earth is in bad shape. And then, like 75 years later, Earth gets shit together and decides that it's now time to go back. And hey, you remember that planet we found? And they go back there and they find, the planet's still there, and then they discover that there is I think it's a biosilicate that's in that just occurs it seems to occur naturally on the planet, and so that becomes a new gold rush basically. All the businesses are scrambling to try and set up ways to exploit this resource on this planet. That is, the key is it's good for medical tech, because it somehow like facilitates biotech, and so like it's a big thing. And it's kind of cool because in Blue Planet, if you have to resort to cybernetics, you're low rent because everything is biotech in there. Most corporates are basically prenatally engineered, and in vitro engineered, stuff like that. So everybody's like, if you have to resort to metal, you're just totally low rent. Um, uh, and the uh, the technology is totally cyberpunk in there. It's not super high tech. Um, it'd be an interesting thing to tack on to a cyberpunk setting, I think, because going to this other planet's not easy. Um, it costs a ton of money, and you actually have to have a bunch of biomods to even make the transit there. Um, so a lot of people who end up relocating them there end up like being in debt to the corporations. Also, an interesting thing about Blue Planet is it's the only RPG I've ever seen, maybe besides Traveler, and I'm not even sure about Traveler, that lets you play cetaceans, because there's a weird event that occurs in the background of Blue Planet where there's a huge uprising over biotech, and so this scientist who had created all these um, highly intelligent cetaceans is forced to release them into the wild, and so they interbreed with the wild dolphins and whales, and they end up with every dolphin and whale on Earth being sentient and sapient. Um, and so they're now just working for the corporations, especially with Poseidon being a water world. There's one corporation whose head of security is an orca. It's pretty cool. Uh, I think you could make a play for this, basically if you were to follow the quantum science down the rabbit hole, you could end up coming up with a world where, like, yes, we have magic in a limited extent. And I know, like, in my cyberpunk games, I started to introduce the concept of psionics too. So that's another way you can do it. You can do low end psionics as a way to introduce magical effects into your games. And if you want full on magic, and you can track them down, Atlas Games and Ionis Publications, which later on became DreamPod 9, did an entire set of cyberpunk adjacent books written for the cyberpunk system that brought into things like vampires and like sympathetic magic and stuff like that. So you can definitely find the building blocks there. I also somewhere have a Dragon magazine that talks about how to bring magic through the lens of Record of Lodoss Wars into Mekton, which was the game that was out at the time, which is also the interlock system that Cyberpunk uses, so you could engineer it through that as well. Let's see. I have not, but yeah, I know that when we ran my campaign back in the day for 2020, I started making a lot of the cybernetics, any cybernetic that didn't require machines. Like, I started coming with biotech versions of it. They were about 10 times as expensive as the cybernetic equivalent, but it made for a much more interesting game because not only were they more expensive, but they were less impactful because they were biological. And of course, in Cyberpunk's core system, you have the humanity loss, which was a factor that would always limit your characters. We also come up with detailed rules for therapy and treatment for humanity loss too. So a player that wanted to spend time and money going to regular therapy sessions and stuff could mitigate that and could push their cybernetic presence, which was another fun way of doing things. In fact, in my Pacifica setting, if you were working for the government of the island, because it was a city-state, it wasn't just a city, it was a city-state, you had to, but also had free access to the counseling and the drug therapy that you needed to be able to push it. So they had really effective full Borgs, and I was kind of informed by Appleseed on that, where Appleseed has all the really cool full Borgs with all the nifty gizmos. So we're in the last 3 minutes of this stream. I think this has been a really good stream. I appreciate everybody who showed up and all the good back and forth. This format seems to be working, so maybe I'll just start doing this unless I have something specific that's stuck in my craw to talk about. I really do enjoy riffing off of your guys' comments and suggestions. I always say I don't have a lot to talk about until I find something to talk about. So, I mean, because I'm going to go back to what I was saying earlier. I don't feel that I have all that much to say about things, but clearly I do. But it's kind of, there's some imposter syndrome there, and there's also some just, but I'm honest about who I am and what I am. Yeah, there's a lot of nobody wants to listen to what I have to say kind of a thing going on there. So yeah, I think we might repeat this in the future. I mean, I'm gonna try and start doing. I keep saying this, but I really have to correct it. I'm gonna try and do some non-streamed topics when I can come up with ones that I think I have enough to say. Those ones work really well because they can be 15 minutes long and not be bad. In fact, YouTube loves them. So, not that I care. Let's see. I have used sympathetic magic in my games. I actually ran a voodoo gang in one of mine that was actually managing to pull some stuff off. That was back in the 80s, and so it may not have been as culturally sensitive as it should have been, but it was the 80s, and we had predators fighting the voodoo brothers or whatever. Let's see. Yeah, it's funny because I also ended up running. So back in the day, Appleseed was one of my favorites. Bubblegum Crisis was one of my favorites. Um, AD Police, the spinoff from Bubblegum Crisis, but also I was a huge fan of Patlabor. Um, Back in the day, or Pat Labor, depending on how you pronounce it. I learned it as Pat Labor, but I believe it's actually supposed to be Pat Labor. Pat Labor, and then Ghost in the Shell. I was really into Ghost in the Shell when it first hit comic scenes before it was really big. I could just say I was into Ghost in the Shell before it was cool, and so though a lot of that informed my Cyberpunk games. So when they came out with the ACPR um, rules for Cyberpunk, which is basically their way of the um, um, battle suits and power armor rules. I already had power armor and battle suits in my game, and I'd used my own system extrapolated from an article that had appeared in Challenge magazine where they had a combat cyber form, and so we had combat cyber forms, which were robots. And then I just extrapolated those. And then when the actual rules came out, it was easy. I just started converting everything I had into those rules. Um, all right, so we are at 11:45. I have got to call it for the day. I again really appreciate those who came by. I'm not going to name you off because you all know who you are, and that requires much scrolling. But again, um, you guys are all amazing. I appreciate you coming back week to week, especially considering I often waffle until I think it's really cool that so many of you show up because a lot of times I don't even post a stream until the day of the stream. You just know to look for me or something. I don't know, but I'm gonna head out. I got things I got to do. Y'all have a great day and keep the conversation going on the Discord. If you're not on my Discord, get over there. It's you can find the link in any of my videos, and all you have to do is look up Elfbait on Discord. I'm there. And have a good one. Get out and game, guys.